But specifically, why do we need to resolve to pray for the church, and starting in this church as the church? Now, let me set a number of reasons before us. First of all, because we need God's help. We need God's help. If the resolutions that we've looked at up to this point have taught us anything, it's that we need God. We need His help. We're broken. We're not doing the things that God has called us to do as a church with perfect consistency. Well, how do we respond to that brokenness? Well, by prayer. What is prayer? Prayer is the acknowledgement of our helplessness. Unless you're trying to play a trick on somebody, you don't cry out for help unless you're hurting, right? There was the story of the boy who cried wolf, and he cried out for help even though he didn't really need help. And I know there are pranksters who will cry, fire, fire, even when there's no fire. But usually we don't cry for help unless we really need help. Well, prayer is what we do when we realize how truly hopeless and helpless we are in and of ourselves. That's why we need to pray for each other, because we need help. Now, let me just give one illustration of this in the example of Moses. All right? Now, Moses did a lot, didn't he? I mean, Moses was the guy. If you think about someone who seemed to have it all together, was doing lots of things for God, it was Moses in the Old Testament, right? And yet Moses knew that none of his efforts would be of any value unless the Lord blessed them. Moses knew that? How do we know that Moses knew that? Well, listen to what he prays in Psalm 90, verse 17. It's Moses' one psalm in the Psalter. The last verse of Psalm 90, Moses prays, "And establish the work of our hands for us." Yes, he repeats it. Yes, establish the work of our hands. What's he saying? He's saying, God, we're working. We're using our hands, we're using our heart, we're using our feet, we're using our mouth. We're working. We're trying to do what you've called us to do. But you know what? Unless you establish it, unless you root it, it's all going to be a waste. That's what Moses was praying, brothers and sisters. And that's what we need to realize as well, that unless God establishes our work, it's a waste. And we need to pray then that God would establish our work. And that's why prayerlessness on the part of a church is the surest way to not receive God's blessing. It's the surest way to guarantee that all of the work we do is a colossal waste of time. Right? Because if God doesn't establish it, if we don't seek the Lord's help, we can't have confidence that it will be established. Now, I know it's true that some of us may not be praying at all for the church, and most of us are hardly praying for the church. Now, we won't go around and ask each person to say how much time I spent in prayer for the church this week. It might be embarrassing, right? To ask how much time did you spend in prayer for the church this week? And did I? We may not be praying personally and heartily for the members and ministry of this congregation, but if we're a needy people, and if we realize this, and if we realize that God has all of God has a heavenly treasury that He's eager to pour out upon us, then we will seek His help in prayer. So why pray for the church? First of all, because we're needy. We need God's help.